we're adjusting some heads here. Let's see if we can fix that. There we go. All right, I think we're on a minute or two early, so it's going to take just a moment to greet you. Thank you for joining us this evening, and hope you had a good day. It's a beautiful day outside, 22 degrees, I think, as we reached where we are. So certainly the weather we've been longing for and hoping for. So I hope you were able to enjoy the day. And I know yesterday out to the lake wasn't quite as warm as today or sunny, but there were still lots of people out. Of course, it's opening day walleye fishing, so lots of people were out. So obviously with a big lake, they can keep their distance, so that is good. So just going to wait for a couple minutes here before we really get going. Just others are going to get notified and so on. So a couple of things while we're waiting. I know this can be watched later, so be able to catch this, but I just again want to remind you, if I forget to do so this after this service part is done, the ladies Bible study will be at 9:30 tomorrow morning. I know it's a long weekend and maybe not as many will be able to join, or we'll have something else that they're going to do, so which is fine. And then men's will be on at 10:30 in the morning. So I want to encourage those who are able to, and I know others, 10:30 in the morning is right in the middle of the day. So either, depending on when you get up, you're just kind of into gear doing stuff and don't want to stop until lunch, or it's coffee break time. So, but of course it can be watched later. I know others are working, and so just making that available, of course. And then as we will go on a week, I will probably announce this again, but Wednesday night we will be, actually I'll be doing it from somewhere else. We'll be going up to the camp that we have Camp Haven with our young people go, which is north of Kenora a little bit. So I'll be going. I'll be out there Wednesday evening doing live service from there. So I'll be able to, which I'm actually thinking about it this afternoon, quite excited about, because I'll be able to do a walk around, hopefully, if the signal stays good, be able to show a little bit of the camp and so on and what we're doing. And with, of course, everything taking place this year, we'll see what we have, but we're still looking forward to having teen camp in August. And so just to be in prayer for that, but be able to do it from there, and probably still planning on doing men's Bible study, and that'll be Wednesday morning. Actually, it'll be out from camp as well. So, but just taking a couple of days to really get things fired up and so on there. And just make you aware of that. It'll be from a different location. I'm sure I'll mention that to Wednesday when I get on. So, all right, we've got a few people jumping on. It's great to have you, and thank you for taking part. And so again, just a beautiful day the Lord gave to us, and we're going to sing a couple songs for you, and hopefully it goes smoothly. We've got accompaniment. I think it's for all the verses, so bear with us. We might do a verse a cappella if that is the case, but it was certainly a good change to have service from church here this morning. So we are the only ones here. Obviously, as a family, we make up 7, so we can't have anyone else join us, but hopefully soon they'll open that up and can begin meeting again, which we much look forward to. So we're going to open a prayer, and then I'm going to get out of the way so you can see everybody and get hopefully everything will work fine. Hey, it is what it is, right? So just bear with us and we'll get through. Father, we thank you for this time this evening, for the beautiful day you've given to us, and just for all that you blessed us with. We are excited about this time of year. And so we do thank you for it. Bless our service time this evening as we will look into your word. And as we certainly have a lot of things have changed certainly this year that I'm sure we were not anticipating January 1st, but we know that all things do not escape your sight. And you know everything that's going to take place and everything that has taken place and yet will take place. And so we are grateful that we can be secure and knowing that you are still in control, you're still on the throne. So we thank you for that. Bless the service, we pray this evening. And for those who will join on, are joining, or will watch later on, we pray. Amen. All right. So our first hymn we're going to do is When We All Get to Heaven, and then we're going to transition over to the Solid Rock. So we're going to try and make sure we'll do our best, all right? No one's, we've got a piano that we can do this accompanying with, so we're very grateful for that. And so we're going to get into it here. 542. It's pretty much going to start right into it. Oops, 542. So.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim's pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, cloud a shadow, not a sign. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. We all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of divine glory will the toils of life repay. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Onward to the prize before us, soon His beauty will behold. Soon the pearly gates will open, we shall tread the streets of gold. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing it'll be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory.
All right, then 404 is going to be the Solid Rock. All right, okay. 404.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only lean on Jesus' name. On the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils His lovely face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the wind. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. His oceans covenanted flood support me and overwhelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, He that is all my hope and stay. Lord, Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When He shall come, His trumpet sound, oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, all blessed to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand.
All right. Thank you again for joining us this evening. We've had some more people able to tune in here. I'm just adjusting this. Sorry. There we go. So if you have tuned in, again, the interaction would be great. But for those who are much more familiar, we can't see you, but obviously you can see us and so on. So. And just grateful to be able to do this. Certainly, would be a lot different if this was even 50 years ago. Be a whole lot different, and so we're grateful for that we're able to do. So I'm going to make sure that my electronic device is turned off and silenced. I have some great friends who love to every once in a while do phone check for me. And I'm not sure if they do it on a timer, so obviously they would do it not during church, but they would do it before and have the timer. No, they at some point somebody will do a phone check for me, and just to make sure that my phone's off. So I think only once I had my phone go off, and I had stuck at my wife's purse that morning before checking. So it came from her direction. It was my fault. But anyway, thank you for being a part. And this we went back to church today as far as doing this live from church, and with the piano behind us, and it certainly does fill and help and with singing and so on. And so doing our best. Of course, we know if you're singing along, we cannot hear you, obviously, but certainly do look forward to and miss that time of all our voices joining together. So tonight we're going to be looking at the book of Genesis. We're going to go to chapter 50 first, and then we're going to go to chapter 39. And we're going to use an example as we find. This is, again, nothing new, but sometimes it's good, it's refreshing to kind of just be reminded of things. And as we look at our Bible characters, and I'm sure if we asked you who your favorite Bible character is, certainly we could have a myriad of answers as far as who they are, and to each perspective, and which is great and wonderful. And maybe some character really applies to us in a different way than another. And so as we look at the most, probably one of the most famous ones, Abraham, Moses, and so on, but you have Moses' mother and Moses' sister. An example there of a couple ladies and used tremendously. And of course, to Moses' mother, to Moses, and his sister, Miriam, who, if you read later on, there was a bit of a family struggle there during the time of the wandering of the wilderness. We have as well Gideon and Samson. And then we have Deborah, who was judges, and she ruled for a while. And then, of course, we can just go through. And as the writer of Hebrews says, time would fail us of all the people that God used in circumstances and so on. So as we look at, I think one of my favorite characters after doing some time and researching and studying and listening and so on, probably one of my favorite characters would be Joseph. We don't know much of the negative aspect of Joseph, though I absolutely believe he was human, born, of course, to Jacob and Rachel, who was, of course, his most beloved wife. He married Leah first, and you can read that in Genesis, and that was quite a mess. But as we go through Joseph, we find the Lord allows an insight into Joseph's life that looks at the aspects of his life, and we don't find a great deal of character flaws with Joseph, but I'm sure he had them. I'm sure if we could take some time in Joseph being human, with the betrayal of his brothers, with being made a slave from a prominent family to being a slave in a land where he doesn't know the language, doesn't know the customs, I'm sure, to going to prison. And of course, we love the part where he goes from his brother's hands to the caravan right to prime minister of Egypt. Some of the middle stuff is a little hard to see and so on. But as we travel through this time frame with Joseph, I want to use this, if we could, and look at a topic that I think we could all in some way associate with. I'm turning to Genesis 50. I haven't gotten there myself. So with Genesis 50. So if we could start the service time this evening off with a question, and this is the question. Have you ever been wronged by someone? Have you ever been wronged by someone? And no doubt in your mind, almost as an instant the question came up, you probably had a thought in your mind of something that transpired that you feel and you believe you were wronged, and maybe so. So I don't know what it is, obviously, but as we will look here at Joseph, I believe it is some great thoughts that we can pull out of this. And as we see, we're going to get to the end where Joseph is going to talk to his brothers at the very end and explain why he is not taking vengeance on them for what they did. Then we're going to back up just a little bit and kind of skirt through his life a little bit and see where God has brought him, okay? So Genesis chapter 50, we get to verse number 19 and 20. And Joseph said unto them, this is his brothers, fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, ye thought evil upon me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. Let's do verse 21. Now therefore, fear ye not. I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. So as we look at a few verses here, we have to know what has transpired and kind of get a glimpse and an insight into this point that we find. And we may know the story well, and which is great. But again, as we look at responding when we are wronged and when we have had injustice done to us, I want you to turn to chapter 39 with me, if you would. So we start at the end. And the question that I proposed to you and asked you was, have you ever been wronged? If you have spent any amount of time on the planet, the answer is going to be yes, unless you're completely naive about how people treat you, or you've never come in contact with anyone since you were 2 years old. Otherwise, at some point in your life, someone's going to have wronged you. Someone is going to have done something wrong to you. And human nature, our first reaction for ourselves is to pay back. And the thing with payback is we want to make sure that the other person understands what they've done, how they've wronged us, and the payback. We want to make sure is worth our effort, and for the other person to realize that if they try something again, what is going to happen to them is going to be far more worse than what they did to us. And so then we find it just going back and forth. And then, of course, we find to the extreme, we find people are seriously hurt and or murdered. And it comes from this idea. Now, in chapter 39, if you're there, why don't you look at verse, this is Joseph has been in Egypt in Potiphar's house. So let's back up just a little bit. Joseph was born to Jacob and Rachel. Rachel, of course, was the woman that he loved. Worked for Laban for 7 years to marry Rachel. Jacob was tricked, married Leah instead. Worked another 7 years, married Rachel. So Leah was, and God blessed Leah's womb, and bore many sons and I believe a daughter to Leah. And Rachel had Joseph and Benjamin. After Benjamin, she dies. Fast forward, Joseph, of course, the firstborn of his beloved wife Rachel, receives a coat of many colors and so on, and given prominence, giving position, and it appears that he didn't have to go and tend after sheep and so on like his other half brothers did. So there's some resentment that builds up. Joseph wants to go out and look for his brother and so on. He finally catches up with them and so on to bring news to see what's going on. And of course, they see him coming, and he had some dreams. God gave him some dreams, and they see him come. They throw him in a pit. They want to kill him. And of course, Judah persuades him not to, and so he's finding, and I think he seems to have some sort of a moral righteousness here, and doesn't want Joseph's blood on his hands. So what they do is they take him out of the pit. Some caravans come by. They sell him for 30 pieces of silver, and off Joseph goes. I imagine his brothers had both relief at that moment, but later on, I think they would have some guilt that would come along. They kill an animal. They put Joseph's coat in it, rip it up, put his coat in it with full of blood, bring it home, and of course share the fake bad news with their father. Joseph gets to Egypt. He's purchased as a slave by Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian. And we find that as he is brought into Potiphar's house, the Lord blesses Joseph. And what an amazing phrase. And verse number 2 of chapter 39, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, which means he was a successful man. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Now, if you read later on, we find that Joseph is in charge of everything that Potiphar has. Potiphar has no idea what he owns, except for the food that's available, and obviously what he can see around the house. But Joseph is put in charge of all of his property, all of his belongings. So we get down, and we find that Potiphar's wife has a longing for Joseph. Joseph obviously has had enough understanding and training growing up that he would not yield to the temptation that we find in Potiphar's wife. She wants him, and he is refusing. She calls him in, tries to persuade him. He flees, but his garment is left behind. And as she had hold on it, he just lets it go and flees. And so we find in this the first occasion of what is going to take place. He's a slave to in Potiphar's house, and he's working. The Lord bless him, and he's prosperous and so on. But we find he is going to be moving up. We look at this time in prison as Joseph being sent to a worse place. Now, probably the physical location and addition of the prison probably wasn't better than Potiphar's house, obviously. But really, as we find where Joseph is going to go, prison is actually a step up. It's a promotion. Can we say it that way? Verse 19, it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him. Now, she had lied about him. After saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph Joseph's master took him, put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison, in the prison. Now look at verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison, committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. He was in charge. He was in charge of the prison while he was a prisoner, basically. So as we go through this, we find the account in Joseph's life and the things that are taking place. We find the Lord was with him, made a promise. First of all, we see the faith of Joseph. Now, if we can read between the lines and understand that Joseph is human, I imagine he had a lot of questions as he is being bound and dragged behind the caravan, going to who knows where. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe they're going to Egypt. And I would imagine that Joseph was not saying to himself, this is okay. It's going to work out. One day, I'm going to be the prime minister of Egypt. I know where this is headed. Now, we know the Lord gave him the dreams and that these bow down. So Joseph had an understanding that the Lord was he showed him something that was going to transpire in the future. But I don't believe that Joseph went through every single situation, had every single day saying, this is going to be great. I know I'm going to be the prime minister one day of Egypt. I know where all this is going to go, and I'm going to see my family again, and so on. I think he had moments of trouble. I think he had moments of maybe of doubt, understanding, Lord, how are you going to use this? How are you going to fit this? How is this going to transpire so that those dreams that you gave me are going to come true? Now, find that the Lord was with him, and everything that took place in prison was of the Lord. Look at verse 23. And the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it prosper. So as we go back to chapter 50 and verse 20, as we saw there, what did Joseph say? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So we see with his faith, first of all, he saw, letter A there, if you take notes, we see the providence of God, the foresight, or to foresee. God had this thing planned. Now let me keep my finger there. We're going to stay in pretty much in Genesis, but I want to go to chapter 45. Now, here we find in this chapter, Joseph could not refrain from revealing himself to his brothers. Could you imagine the emotions of that day? Here these men come for grain. They're invited in. These sojourners, these travelers are invited in to have a feast with this mighty ruler of Egypt, not the Pharaoh, but one of the mighty rulers of Egypt. And Joseph finally reveals himself. Could you imagine the emotions? Joseph probably weeping, his brothers in shock, right? He said, I am Joseph, your brother, verse 4. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Stop there for just a second. In my mind, I picture the brothers panicking. They are in an awful spot. At Joseph's command, they could be thrown into prison. The best case scenario, he could tell them to get out of Egypt and never come back. Find food in a different place. The second best option was they'd be thrown into prison. The worst option is he could have them all killed as spies. So I could imagine their hearts sank. I could imagine the colors lost from their faces as Joseph said, I am Joseph whom you sold into Egypt. Oh. Now, look at what he says in verse 5. Now, therefore, be not grieved. Don't be sad, nor angry with yourselves. They had guilt, and don't be angry with yourself. I imagine these boys had some regret for many years that ye sold me hither. Don't be sad. Don't be angry. Don't have all these. Don't get over emotional on this in the sense of regret and so on what you did. For God did send me before you to preserve life. And we read that in chapter 50 already, verse 20. God orchestrated all this. But brothers, he had to use you to sell me to get me to Egypt. He chose to use you to sell me to get me to Egypt so that I could save much people alive. So we see, first of all, the providence of God. And I believe we see, second of all, the faithfulness of God. God did this to preserve life. Joseph said, this is bigger than me. This is not about me. But God had chose me to bring me to this place, to bring me to this position so that much people could be saved alive. How else would Pharaoh have known? I mean, God could have shown him other ways, but through Joseph to show him that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be 7 years of drought, so that they could work ahead and save up. So we see the providence of God. This is what God has planned. God planned this for me, you to sell me, to get me to this place, because this is what he wanted to do, to show himself mighty to the nations. And God had a plan right through. So we see, first of all, I believe, his faith. As we get to in chapter 15, verse 20, but also here in 45. Brothers, God had a plan. And this is what he used. Second of all, we find his focus. Now, and the faithfulness of God, Lamentations 3:23, great is thy faithfulness, his mercies are new every morning. And God does not change. The character of who he is, the person of who he is, does not change. Our circumstances change and so on, but and we as people can be changing, but God does not change. Now, look at Psalm 105, verses 16 through 22. We find here the psalmist goes and refers back to Joseph. Verse 16, Psalm 105. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread of Egypt with grain and so on. He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant. Verse 18, whose feet they hurt with fetters. He was laid in irons, means he was a prisoner. What an extreme. And we'll get to that here in a moment. Until the time that his word came, the word of the Lord tried him. The king sent and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler over all his substance, or over all his property, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. And we find, if you continue on, it talks about how the Lord increased the nation of Israel. And certainly as we look at this now, let's go back to Genesis if we could. All right. Now we see the focus on what do we learn here with Joseph? Well, we see that he's a slave, and sadly, it seems that even from throughout history of mankind, mankind has enslaved other people. Humans, we as humans have enslaved other humans. And it's a sad reality in our world. But as we look at this, God used that circumstance, that vehicle, if I can say it that way. Genesis 39. And as we look through this, what do we find as he's in Potiphar's house? Well, we find that Joseph, as we think of his life with his father, he was one who had a coat of many colors. I'm sure that he did not have to tend sheep like his brothers. He probably didn't have to work hard like his brothers, though he seemed to show an interest in the life of his brothers. But it seems that it appeared that Jacob kept him close. He didn't want to lose Joseph. And maybe, well, you can't go because it's dangerous and so on. And maybe it seems obviously that his brothers resented. And there's a lot of family issues there. But we find as Joseph was brought to Egypt, verse 1 of 39, Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And of course, as I read those, we find that Joseph served him, was an overseer of his house, and all that he had was put in his hand. So we find that the Lord blessed him, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and knew not aught he had. He didn't know it. Everything they had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So he's a handsome fellow. Imagine bald, beautiful and bald. No. He was a good looking person, goodly person, well favored. But what we find in Potiphar's house, Joseph learned to manage property. I imagine he wasn't given the same responsibility in his father's house. So before he can set foot as the prime minister directly under Pharaoh in the land of Egypt, Joseph had to learn some things. So we get to chapter 50 and 45, which we love, the revealing and so on, and Joseph has forgiven his brothers, but there's a lot of time that's gone from him being sold by his brothers to setting foot as the prime minister of Egypt. Joseph has to learn some things that he probably didn't have an opportunity to learn at home. And I would say, no doubt, to the fault of his father. So he had to learn how to manage property, look after things. So Potiphar gives him the responsibility of looking after the things of his house and all that he had. And the Lord blessed Joseph, made him prosperous, but also the Lord showed to Potiphar that he was with Joseph. We find, second of all, as the focus, that not only did Joseph have to learn how to manage property, but he had to learn how to manage people. Now, we find this in prison, as we read in the later part of chapter 39, that Joseph learned how to manage people. Could you imagine being a prisoner and looking after everything in the prison? The keeper, as the Lord was with Joseph and blessed him, the keeper probably had a very easy job. Got stuck? Joseph, what do you think? And the Lord blessed him. And Joseph had to learn. I'm sure there were difficult days. I'm sure there was tough situations. I'm sure that it wasn't just everything fell into place for Joseph and handed on a silver platter. The Lord gave him wisdom, and Joseph had to learn how to do this. So if we look back, we see from Potiphar's house, it was an upgrade to prison, really, because he learned how to manage people. And from there, Joseph had to learn to be patient and manage and so on, all myriad types of people. I'm sure there's people in there that were mistreated, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. And Joseph had to learn how to deal with them, how to handle those kind of situations, and no doubt feuds inside prison and whatever else there was. When Joseph had to learn, the Lord had to bring Joseph through that so that he could take him from there and put him into in charge of in Egypt. Now look at chapter 40, if you would. And we find and we don't have time, I'd love to just go through and read it as a narrative, and it's a beautiful story, but let's look at chapter 40. A couple guys are in here, and Pharaoh had become angry with two of his officers, his chief butler and baker. They came in, they had a dream. Joseph was given the interpretation by the Lord for those dreams. And of course, we know that one of them is going to be hanged and the other is going to be given back his job. What a sad that was in 3 days. Joseph gives them the interpretations, and then we find, he says in verse 14 to the butler, we find verse 14, but think on me when it will be well with thee, and show me kindness, I pray, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. It would appear to me that Joseph struggled with being in prison, falsely accused. I'm sure he had rough days in prison. For indeed, I was stolen away of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. I've been falsely accused. Imagine what the butler said. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, man, as soon as I get out, oh, absolutely. I'm going to mention you and so on. And yeah. What happened? Verse 23, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, after this took place, 2 full years in prison, Joseph is sitting there and waiting. Now, we don't have time to read it all, but we know that Pharaoh had a dream, doesn't understand the interpretation. And the butler remembers. The Lord brings him back to mind. Oh, yeah, there's a guy in prison, and he was able to tell me of the dream. Chapter 45, if you would, with me. So what did he have to learn? The focus was he had to learn how to manage people and property. First was property, then people, because God was going to put him in a place that he's going to have to be responsible for both in a major, major scale. Chapter 45. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them, and that they stood by, that stood by him, and he cried, cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with them, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. He sent all of his servants out. Verse 2, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians of the house of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said unto his brethren. Now, picture that, if you would. He sends everybody out. So just him with all of his brothers. They don't recognize him. They don't know who he is. He sends everybody out, everybody's out, and he just breaks down and starts crying. Could you imagine the awkwardness that's there? I could picture it. Here they are. They're before Joseph, and they have no idea how to respond. Here's this mighty ruler at his beckon, could make their lives absolutely miserable. And they watch him just break down and cry. Don't know how long it was, but look at verse 3. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Flashbacks, right? We saw that. Joseph said, verse 4, unto his brethren, come near to me, pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me thither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall be neither be earing nor harvest. So there's not going to be any harvest, planting, or anything. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. And he continues on. Whoa. Could you imagine just the emotions going on in this scenario? Thirdly, I want you to see Joseph forgave. We see the faith of Joseph, the focus of Joseph, but we see the forgiveness. We see the forgiveness. Now with that, I want you to go to chapter 50. Chapter 50. So in between this, 45 and 50, his brothers go back home. There's a caravan that's sent. They're moving his father's house. They're moving from Israel, where there's no bread, to Egypt. And so here's this caravan's gone down. Could you imagine? Oh, imagine Jacob, first of all, seeing so many more people come back than what went. And his brothers coming. Oh, I think there was both excitement and anticipation and trepidation. How's dad going to respond? How are we going to break the news to him? Just take some time and think about, create that scenario in your mind. Whoa, right? Chapter 50. Let's look at some verses. Look at so what happens is now, Jacob has come into the land. They set up in the land of Goshen. To the Egyptians, shepherds were an abomination. So Israel and Jacob, whose name was Israel and all of his family was sent off to a different place, which was great for sheep and so on. And they were set off to the side so that it wasn't with the Egyptians, because that was an abomination. But look, so then Jacob dies, Israel dies. Now his brothers are worried that Joseph was so nice to them because dad was alive, and not to break dad's heart, but Joseph was kind. Now they're really panicking. They've gone to bury dad. They've come back. Verse 15, when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us and will certainly requite us or pay us back the evil which we have did unto him. And they sent a messenger to Joseph saying, thy father did command before he died, saying, so, hey, by the way, this is what dad said. Before he died, this is what he said. So shall you say unto Joseph, forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren, chapter 50, verse 17, and their sins, for they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of thy servants, of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. And his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And this is where we read earlier. Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? Can I take God's place to dare to take vengeance? But as for you, ye thought it evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. We started off with that portion, but we just did a quick run through to see where he got to that portion. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is not simply just putting aside what someone has done to us and pretending it never happened. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is a reconciliation, understanding what was done was wrong and coming to a reconciliation and not holding that against the person. Joseph said, guys, I've given what you've done to me, and I've given that to God, and God has shown me that that was a part of his purpose and plan so that I could be an instrument to set much people alive. So I'm not holding that against you. God has blessed me, and God had a purpose and a plan. Yes, you thought evil, but God had a great plan. Forgiveness is not holding against someone what they have done. True reconciliation means that both parties come together, admit what was wronged, ask forgiveness for what was wronged, and then reconciling and restoring. Reconciling is coming together, going over the issue, dealing with the issue, and then there's a time of restoration. It's not forgetting. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. Only God can truly forget. Only he can. But we need to learn from these things. Joseph, we see his faith. This was God's plan. We see the focus that Joseph had to learn to manage property and people so that God could put him in that perfect place that he had planned all along for Joseph, for a great thing. Could God have chosen Judah or Reuben? Absolutely. Could he have chosen Benjamin? Without a doubt. But he chose Joseph. And then we see the forgiveness. We could spend weeks on that topic right there. So what should be our response when we are wronged? I don't believe we should allow ourselves to be doormats. The Lord didn't teach that. But when we have been wronged, we need to understand that it doesn't take God by surprise. He's not shocked. He's not panicking. But could we take a moment and say, okay, I'm not going to overreact to this, but I'm going to take the time and ask the Lord, what do you want me to learn through this? What do you want to teach me through this? Is there something that you are trying to do in my life through this that you want to grow and mature me? You want to use me as an instrument for something that you have a greater purpose and a good for? Absolutely make reconciliation where possible. Absolutely seek to restore. And it's not always possible. But as much as lies within us, we should do so. But understanding, just because we see something as a great wrong and injustice in our life, don't forget that that may be the thing that God uses to bring us to a place of greater service. And we find the Lord bless Joseph, bless family. Father, we thank you for this day and for the examples you give us in your word. We like reading, we like the end, we like the happy ending stories, that everything comes together. It's that stuff in the middle, the prison, the slavery we don't like to read about, the injustice, the false accusation. I also wonder if Potiphar and his wife were alive still after the promotion of Joseph from prison to prime minister. I often wondered what their thoughts were. How did they respond? Did Potiphar's wife panic? Maybe she acting in a totally different way to Joseph. But you obviously showed those around Joseph that you're with him and you prospered him. And so may we not be ones to react and seek vengeance and so on, but just to take a step back and say, Lord, I'm not enjoying this wrong that's been happening to me, but is there something I need to learn from it? Is there something you're trying to teach me from this? So that I can mature and grow and trust you more. Thank you for this time. Be with us as we go this rest of the week. We ask and pray. Amen. All right. Thank you for again joining us today. And of course, as you noticed, we've done it from the church. Unfortunately, we cannot invite anyone because we make up 7 and that outdoes 5, of course, by 2, but because we're immediate family. So looking forward to having more. So just a couple quick notes. I know some others have kind of popped on along the service away. So for this week, we're going to have, though it's long weekend, we're still going to have Ladies Bible Study in the morning and at 9:30, and I'll do the men at 10:30 in the morning. And then and that's tomorrow. Then Tuesday, I'll be heading up toward north of Kenora, opening up a camp. That's where we do our teen Camp Haven week. And so we're going to go there and start opening things up, see what needs to be done before it can go on. And of course, anticipating the Lord will allow and things to be opened up so that we can have tea. And so Wednesday morning for men's Bible study will be from there. And Wednesday evening Bible study, I will do from there as well, which I'm looking forward to because I can kind of turn the phone around, show you the campgrounds and so on. And hopefully the mosquitoes are not in full force yet. So if you see that, I've got a little bit of a different background. It's not a green screen. It'll be from for real. So we've had great internet connection there before, so I trust it'll still be there. If not, well, then we'll just miss you this Wednesday and go to next Sunday. All right. So that'll be the plan for this week. But otherwise, still, we'll do our very best to keep to those times and certainly miss everyone and look forward to gathering together again. All right. God bless you. Have a great week.